I am very, very honored to be with you. It's always nice to recall my good friend Brad Galvez. Originally, I was going to sponsor that bill and had every intention to do so, and was working on some very major federalism legislation that was groundbreaking in the nation, and we got that passed as well. But I was fortunate. My first day in the legislature, my first day on Capitol Hill, my office mate was Brad Galvez, and our doors were always open. We were always back and forth between each other's office, and as we talked about how we would pursue the agenda to secure the blessings of liberty, which was why we both ran, how we would move that forward, we talked about this, and Brad took this bill, did such a great job. And you know, Brad and his family we called them Team Galvez. They just mobilized and worked so hard. And of course, you know that we lost our dear friend Brad a few years ago to kidney cancer. And I keep his funeral program. I was asked to speak at his funeral. In fact, Cedar, I was up in Montana, speaking in Montana when we learned that Brad passed. I was clear up in Thompson Falls and then up in Kalispell in the middle of the winter when we learned that Brad passed, and Lisa asked me to come and speak at his funeral, and I was trying to figure out frantically how would I get back in time to do that, and if I needed to rent a car and drive all night, we would do that. And fortunately, we found a flight from Kalispell, and I keep Brad's funeral program on my credenza in my Capitol office. What a great man. What a great man. What a great legacy that he brought about. I'm grateful for him. I'm grateful for Larry and for you all. What you're doing matters tremendously. And I want you to think about what is happening right here. Think about the power of one person, one organization, to go against the grain and stand for true principle. Right? Think about that. One man inspires another and forms an organization, and they get together, and a small band that is persistent and professional and relentless changes policy by being willing to go against the grain. I'm deeply grateful for what you're doing, because think about what you're standing for. We're standing for protecting the purchasing power of our property. That's as deep as it gets. Protecting the purchasing power of our property. I'm honored to be with you here. Anytime I get the opportunity to speak about securing the blessings of liberty, I'm grateful to have that opportunity. But think about protecting the purchasing power of our property. George Sutherland was our one and only Supreme Court justice from Utah on the U.S. Supreme Court in the period that so much began to change, the early 1900s. George Sutherland, our Sutherland Institute here in Utah, is named after him. And there's a quote a thing that he said that I think applies so greatly to what we're doing. He said, "Man has three great rights: life, liberty, property. If you give a man his life, but you take away his liberty, you take away all that makes life worth living. If you give him his liberty, but you take from him the property that is the fruit and the badge of his liberty, you still leave him a slave." So to protect and preserve the purchasing power of property is as constitutionally critical as anything we could be about. So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for working on this critically important issue. Now, it reminds me of a story. I fly and I speak a great deal all over the West, all over the nation, and I love going through Denver, because in Denver they have the best shoe shine guy in the nation. He actually takes a flame and he puts this stuff on your shoes, and then he like burns it in and coats it in and melts it in. I don't know what he does, but it's great. And so in Denver, if you've been in the Denver airport, they have these big moving sidewalks, right? And they've got four of them. They've got two going one way and two coming the other on these moving sidewalks and going down the terminal. I had a layover, and I'm in the Denver terminal at a layover, and I'm walking along, and I've got my bag, and I'm going through the middle one of these moving sidewalks, and there's a woman right next to me with her bag, and she's walking along as well. And so we're walking up, and I hit the moving sidewalk, and off I go, and she's in the moving sidewalk to the left of me, going this way. And as she hits the moving sidewalk with her bag, she stumbles and kind of tries to catch her balance, and then she looks around. And she looks around to see who saw this happen. And she's looking around with her bag, and she keeps going. And she keeps walking and acting like nothing ever happened, trying to walk as fast as she can to keep going against the grain of the moving sidewalk. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I actually got through my end of the moving sidewalk and kind of circled back and stopped and just watched. And she just kept going. As she kept going, and as the sidewalk moved back, she kept trying to walk harder and faster with her bags, and one in her arm and one that she was pulling, and she kept going and kept going and kept going, and losing ground and losing ground and losing ground the faster she went. We have an ingenious system designed to convey us to peace and prosperity. Most ingenious system ever devised to convey us to peace and prosperity faster than anywhere else in the world, better than anywhere else in the world has ever done. But does it feel now that maybe we're on that moving sidewalk going the other way in our system? Well, let's look at that. Let's examine that. If you've got your playbook with you, we've got a very simple playbook that gives us the recipe. You know, when I came back, I used to work for the mayor of the city of Osaka in Japan. And when I came back, I was back and I just had a brand new little baby, and I had a new job, and I was going out to a sales call, and I'm in this brand new little car, used car, but new to us. And I'm driving outside of Park City to get to this appointment I was late for, and I saw a car parked right on the road ready to come in, and as I got up to it, it pulled right out in front of me, ran me off the road, and rolled the car 3 or 4 times and out the sunroof, and just tragic situation. I spent the next 8 months in bed. I'm on the couch. I got to tell you, being on the couch back in the early 80s is not a great deal, because there's only 3 channels. And all day long, all you ever see all day long on the channels, you get personal injury lawyer commercials and soap operas, and the only reprieve is once in a while you get a cooking show. And so I'm laying on the couch, and I just got to love the cooking shows, right? Because the others were kind of worthless TV. But so I'm watching the cooking show, and there was this great cooking show about recipe for cookies. And once in a while, I'd get a reprieve off the couch to go to the store and walk around a little bit. I had back surgery and all kinds of things. And so I got a reprieve to go to the store with my wife, and we're at the store, and I said, honey, I think I remember the recipe for these cookies that I saw on the show last week. She's like, oh, you'll never remember that. Like, well, just humor me. And so she would walk and fetch things like, go get this. Go find some of this. Do they have this in the store, and do they have this? And doggone it, if I didn't remember the recipe. We went home, and they were the best cookies I've ever tasted in my life. They were so good. But think about, just kind of conjure up in your mind, right? Grandma's chocolate chip cookies, right? Marilyn's chocolate chip cookies, right? Just conjure those up a little bit, and you think about what that smells like and what it tastes like. But if you don't remember the recipe matters. Imagine you put, chili powder in the chocolate chip cookies instead of baking powder. Right? What if you decide to throw dirt clods in instead of chocolate chips? Now, it's going to still look like a cookie, right? It'll look like a cookie. But it's not going to taste like Grandma's love. It's not going to, the recipe matters. Think about our recipe. Right in the Declaration of Independence, we have the very simple, ingenious recipe that conveys us to peace and prosperity. Very simple. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal, endowed by their Creator. Now that means there's an exit interview and we have an accountability. Our system is very different than others. Endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights. That means you can't sell them, you can't give them away, they can't be taken from you. What are the rights? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Well, what is pursuit of happiness? That means I can accumulate property, I can hold property, I can keep property, and I can do with it what I will. It's property and the right to determine my own destiny. And then it says, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Why do we have government? Secure these rights. And then the most important part to me, it says that governments derive their power from consent of the governed. Well, who's that, Dan? That's us. So who's the boss in our system? That's us. That's us. We're the boss. This is critical. This may sound like fundamentals. You remember Vince Lombardi every year, right? Vince Lombardi with the world champion professional Green Bay Packers, he would start every year the same way. World champion professional Green Bay Packers, he would start out and say, gentlemen, this is a football. And he would talk about how much it weighed and how big it was. And then he would walk his professional Green Bay Packers out to the field and say, gentlemen, this is a football field. And here's how long it is and how wide it is. And gentlemen, this is a goalpost. And here's how wide and how tall it is. Fundamentals matter. So the boss, before I went to Japan, I worked with my dad. My dad had car washes. And I started washing cars when I was 8 years old. And I would wash and dry and fold towels. And by the time I had come back from being a missionary in Guatemala, I was the manager of my dad's car wash. I mean, I had welded stuff and walked through the grease pit and the mud pit, and I actually got to drive Reggie Jackson's car one time. At 15 years old, right after Reggie Jackson was the World Series MVP, I got to drive his car like 15 feet. I got to pull it up to the vacuums. This Grand Prix. It was really cool. So, I mean, I had been in and out of this car wash, and so now I'm managing the car wash, but my dad has an office manager and a business manager and somebody else they're like old people. They're like 40 and 50, right? And I'm 23. Now I know about the car wash, but I don't know people at 23. And these people that my dad had, they kept telling him, oh, your son is ruining this and your son is ruining that and your son's doing this. And my dad started believing them. And he came to me at one point and said, I don't think this is working out. And we kind of parted ways, and that's when I ended up going to Japan for the first time and back and forth a number of times. And we found out later, of course, that these people had embezzled from my dad. That was kind of a recurring theme, unfortunately. But the point of the story is, I didn't know how to be the boss. At 23, I didn't know how to be the boss, and so I wasn't treated like the boss in our system. Who's the boss, Dan? Us. We are. But if we don't act like the boss, we won't be treated like the boss. If we want to be treated like the boss to institute government and secure our rights, we have to act like the boss. Very simple, right? Very simple. Just like this is a football. That's our system to secure these rights. So now think about money. In the Constitution, it says that Congress shall have the power to coin money and fix a standard of weights and measures. To fix a standard of weights and measures. What is money? What is money? Now, I have, under the Constitution, the right to acquire and retain and use my property. Now, as I'm driving in here, you probably saw them as well. There's a big herd of longhorn cattle coming up the highway. It's really cool to see, right? Now, I could raise cattle, and that's my property, or I can raise hay, and that's my property, and I can carry bales of hay around with me, and if I want to have lunch and this nice sandwich that we have for us, I can take a bale of hay with me and say, here's a bale of hay, would you give me a sandwich? And that's my property. And I can trade that property for something else. I can bring a longhorn cow with me when I go, and I can take that longhorn cow and trade it for things. Or I can take the representation of my liberty and my property in the form of money, in the form of a fixed standard, that I can take my property that I have a right to, that if I don't have property, if I have liberty but not property, that still leaves me a slave, George Sutherland said. But the Constitution said we should have a fixed standard. We should have a reliable standard. Otherwise, our property, what does it mean? If I take my longhorn cow or my bale of hay and I turn it into something and it's a moving sidewalk that keeps going the other way, is my property secure? It's not, is it? So what are we seeing now? What are we seeing today? I pulled one out. This is an eagle from 1906, and then I've got just a more modern silver eagle. Right? But think about this. This was money. We used to have that fixed standard for property, for the representation of my liberty, the representation of my property, the representation of my efforts. We had a fixed standard. Originally 371 and a quarter grains of silver. And then we had a representation that was fixed in gold. And by 1920, for example, this was $20. And it had a recognized value of $20. It had an intrinsic value as well. And for this $20 in 1920, I could get a suit and a tie and shoes, kind of like I'm wearing today. For $20, for this piece of gold, this representation of my property, I could be outfitted quite well. Now let's think about that moving sidewalk. Where are we today? The $20 that this is denominated in, I can't buy the necktie. Let alone the socks or the shoes or the belt or anything. I can't even get the necktie with this today. On the face value. Now the gold value, the intrinsic value, probably somewhere, what, 12,000 or so, right? Or 1,200 or so right now? I could pretty much get this whole outfit and buy lunch and get an extra pair of shoes and a couple more ties. With the value, the worth of this representation of my property and my liberty and my efforts. Now, even on the worth, this may have even additional worth because of its rarity that may go even higher than that. But think about what that means. What happened to the value? Where did it go? This had that value. Where did it go? Well, we kind of know that, don't we? We have in the New Deal era, they had kind of a mantra, and it really hasn't ever gone away. It's kind of picking up steam. Their mantra was tax and tax, spend and spend, elect and elect. Tax and tax, spend and spend, elect and elect. Think about what's happening in Congress. As long as we can tax and dole out and we get elected and lather, rinse, repeat. We keep spending and get elected and lather, rinse, and repeat. And the debt goes from $1 trillion in 1980 to $10 trillion to right now, we're right on the verge of blowing right through $20 trillion in debt. Well, debt is just another tax, right? We're just saying to these young folks that are out here, you'll pay that tax later. We want it now, you'll pay the tax later. Now, the other way that we do it is we say, we're just going to print more money. We'll take the value of this. Now, taxing is taking the value because we're saying this today, we're going to take away more from people later. But then what they've done more recently is more insidious. We're just going to take the value out from under your liberty and your property. We're going to take that moving sidewalk and we're going to turn it on high and run that back while you keep trying to accumulate and store and use your liberty and property, the representation of which is in money. We're going to run that moving sidewalk back against you at high speed. And that's what we're seeing in the erosion of value. But that's where the value's going. I mean, people today are trying to figure out what's going on. I'm making more money than I ever made in my life, and I'm working harder and harder, and they're kind of looking around going, who's watching me? And we're trying to grab our bag and keep moving faster and faster and harder against that moving sidewalk going the wrong way, not realizing what the problem is and not thinking that, hey, I'm going to get off this silly system. This isn't the system that conveys me to peace and prosperity in any way at all. And that's where we are. That's where we find ourselves today. So think about our system, okay? Just to, again, going back to these are the fundamentals. We have a system that is moving us against our efforts to accumulate property with our liberty and then store it and be able to use it and transfer it. So we have a fundamental system problem. Well, what does that look like? So it reminds me of my little son. My son is now, he's now 20. But when he was 6, my son just struggled to learn how to ride his bike. I mean, struggled. I know all of you have had children that have struggled, but he struggled to learn how to ride his bike. And he would try, and he would fall, and he would try, and he would fall, and he would try, and he would skin his elbows, and he would try, and he would skin up his knees, and it just demoralized him. To the point month after month went along, and we got really worried that, boy, maybe he's the exception to the rule. Maybe our little son is really not ever going to learn how to ride his bike. And he was so frustrated and so dejected. And we went camping up Current Creek, up here one time. We took our bikes with us, and months had gone by. And so we're up camping, and one day my little son came to my wife and I, and he said, you'd have to know my son to know that this kind of stuff comes out of him. He says, Mom, Dad, today's the day. The winds of change are about to blow. True story. And he got on his bike and white knuckle, and he's wobbling and down the hill and just gritting with all the determination and the faith he could muster, riding his bike down the hill, and the big excitement coming over, and you can see the energy, and he's actually riding his bike for the first time down the hill, and he runs right into a tree. And he gets back on his bike.
Called trunk driving.
He gets back on his bike with all the faith and the determination and the grit and the energy he can muster, and rides his bike up the hill, white-knuckled all the way. And today my son's known as the unicycle man at the University of Utah, because he's got a unicycle this big, and he's got a unicycle this big, and he rides them everywhere he goes. Our system was designed like a bicycle. It was ingenious. The founder said, we're not going to have just one protector of our liberty, of our property, and the embodiment of our property. We're going to have two. This is a counterintuitive idea that the people are going to divide their power. Remember, who's the boss? The people divide their power among two governments. Madison tells us in Federalist 51, and all throughout the Federalist Papers and all throughout the Constitution, the people divide their power between two governments. Federal, what they called national, we call it today federal. The whole system is really federal. But they divide it to a national government and a state government. And they gave us the recipe, and they gave us the tire pressure right in the Constitution and right in the Federalist Papers. Madison says this tire, the national tire, is going to be few and defined. And this tire, the state tire, is going to be numerous and indefinite. Well, think about where we are today. We've got a national government tire that is so bloated it's about to explode. And we have a state tire that is so flat it's about to chew the rubber right off the rim. Now, we just had an election, and the election discussion was all about who's going to ride this bike. Should we have Hillary Clinton ride the bike or Donald Trump ride the bike? And Hillary Clinton lost, and some people were dejected, and Donald Trump won, and other people were excited that they get to ride this bike. And some people say this bike should go a little to the right, and others say this bike should go a little to the left. How well is that going to work out? We've got to fix the bike. We got to fix the bike. And the founders were so ingenious in what they did, knowing, like anyone that's ridden a bike, any type of machinery, any type of system, the longer it goes, the longer you ride it, the longer you use it, the more it's going to need maintenance and repair. And they knew that. And so they provided tools for us to maintain and repair and restore and upkeep our ingenious system. Think about the tools that they provided for us. Originally, they said, okay, the states are going to control the Senate. And then along came the 17th Amendment. How well is that tool working out for us today? Maybe a little rusty. Maybe more than a little rusty. It's still a tool. States have disproportionate representation in the Senate, particularly smaller western states and other states. It's still a tool. It's a tool with some challenges. The other tool that they talked about was legislation. Madison called it legislative impediments that are not to be despised. In Federalist 28, I think it is, maybe 46. Legislative impediments, that the state legislatures are supposed to be putting up impediments and blocks to restore that balance. Now, another tool that they gave us was litigation. We have the opportunity to sue and go to court and go to the Supreme Court. Now, how's that tool working out for us? Well, it's got some challenges. Maybe it might get better and maybe it might get worse over time, but that's a tool that we have, right? Now, another tool that we have, they talked about, I believe it was Madison, maybe it was Hamilton, that said that one tool is the frowns of the executive magistracy. Frowning governors, right? Has your governor been frowning at the federal government? There are a few out there, but the bully pulpit, the ability for governors to rally their people and whip up the popular sentiment to move issues forward. That's another one of the tools that they talked about. Now, a tool that the Supreme Court talked about just recently as 2012, the Supreme Court said, in the typical case, we look to the states to defend their prerogatives by adopting the simple expedient of not yielding to federal blandishments. I had to look that word up, blandishment. It means coaxing, coercing, cajoling. Adopting the simple expedient of not yielding to federal blandishments when they do not want to embrace federal policies as their own. And then they said this, states are separate and independent sovereigns. Sometimes they have to act like it. That's the Supreme Court within the last 4 or 5 years. So that's a tool, not yielding. It's not a one-size-fits-all tool, but it's definitely a tool. And then right in the Constitution, there's another tool that George Washington described this way. George Washington, in his farewell address, this great, great final counsel of the indispensable man, the father of our country. It was required reading when I was going to school. You used to have to read the Articles of Confederacy, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and George Washington's farewell address. In the farewell address, George Washington said, if in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of the constitutional powers be in any particular wrong, let it be changed by an amendment in the way the Constitution designates. But let there be no change by usurpation. He says that may be the instrument of good in one case, but it's the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. We have a toolkit. We have a pretty robust toolkit that we need to bring all the tools to bear on a system. Because right now we've got a system that is moving against the grain, against our effort in conveying us to liberty and property and peace that our system was designed to convey. But we have the tools. We have the tools to work on the system. Or we can just go about and say, okay, this guy won, and this guy has cool hair, and this guy sounds pretty cool, and we'll put him in office, and maybe we'll check up on him in a couple years. Maybe we won't. Or, Dan, if we're going to be treated like the boss, it's our responsibility to act like the boss. So it reminds me of a story. The year before I was elected, the year that I was considering to run for office, 2009, I've been tracking this issue of preserving and protecting the purchasing power of our property for a long time, long before I was ever in office. And I came across a story. It happened right here in Utah. I was down in St. George. A woman goes into Walmart, and she gets a whole basket of groceries, and she's in Walmart at the checkout stand, and she presents 14 double eagle gold coins to the cashier at Walmart with her basket full of groceries. And the cashier at Walmart said, oh, we don't take that. We only take real money. You have to go to the bank and trade that for real money. And she leaves her basket of groceries sitting there in Walmart, and she goes over to Zion's bank, and she goes to the teller at Zion's bank. She says, I need real money for these. And for her 14 $20 double eagle coins, the teller gives her $280. And she disappears, presumably pays for her groceries, and off she goes. $14 $20 double eagle coins, ranging in date from about 1875 to 1927. Just the intrinsic value of those coins be somewhere close to $14,000. She got $280. The worth of those coins, depending on the grade, could be in the millions. Literally in the millions. But Walmart and the woman wanted real money. Think about where we are when we don't understand value. The nature of our property, the nature of our liberty embodied and represented in money that has a fixed standard, that has a reliable standard of wealth. Imagine the peace and the prosperity that woman would have if she understood the very basic concept of money as an embodiment of our liberty and our property. If the clerk at Walmart or the teller at the bank had recognized the value and the worth of real money, a reliable standard representation of our liberty and our property. What a great opportunity. What a great opportunity we have right now as a small organization to be persistent, relentless in fixing a standard, a reliable standard of property, a reliable standard of liberty, that we don't have to take our longhorn cow with us everywhere we go. We don't have to take our bale of hay with us everywhere we go. We have the freedom and we're secured in the blessing to accumulate property, to pursue happiness as we determine it, and to represent that property in reliable money. And not on a moving sidewalk that's going the opposite direction. This is where we are. This is the opportunity we have in front of us. So the tools that we've talked about. I've already filed the bill for the state of Utah, building on the Utah Legal Tender Act, for the state of Utah to recognize, authorize, and invest in real money. That we, as the representatives of the people, do everything in our power to secure the blessings of liberty by protecting and preserving the purchasing power of their property. What greater action can we take? So that's already filed. Also in the bill, we're going to look at studying income tax implications on the representation of my liberty and property. Other tax implications on my liberty and my property. Institutions for now developing a system for transacting in money that preserves the purchasing power of my property. So that's what's coming forward in the bill, and we need your help. Just like we did with the Utah Legal Tender Act, we need your help going forward on this, and we'll continue to study and move forward that Utah should be the bastion of protecting the representation of our liberty and our property. So now there's only a couple of things left to determine. So now think of where we've been and what you know. You know the power's in you. If we're going to secure liberty and property in the representation of that in what we call money, The power's in you. The power's in you. And you have the tools. We talked about all 6 of them, remember? We've got a Senate that gives us ability in Congress. We've got legislation at the state level. We've got a governor that we hope he'll start frowning more and more and being duly exercised, that we're not preserving and protecting the purchasing power of our people's property. We've got litigation, we've got not yielding, and we've got the ability under Article 5 to restore that system that conveys us to peace and prosperity. The only question now, in conclusion, the only question now is, what are you going to do with the tools that you have? I firmly believe, and I am grateful to you for the stand that you've taken against the grain. It's time to restore that system, that reliable system of peace and prosperity, that system that conveys us. It's time to get off the moving sidewalk going backwards. It's time to get on that system that was so ingeniously designed to take us there better than any system in the world. Thank you for what you're doing, and let's move forward on that. I appreciate your help. Look forward to your support. Thank you very much.